In Rise of Kingdoms, there has always been 5 main troop types ever since the game came out, but past the really early game, you're going to notice almost no one uses tier 1, 2, and 3 units, but mainly tier 4 and tier 5, and there's always been a lot of debating about which troop level is actually better. Are tier 5 going to be stronger, or are tier 4 going to be stronger for free-to-plays especially? So today I will be discussing tier 5 versus tier 4. Which troop is going to be the best troop for you to use? I will discuss the differences statistically between each troop. I will show some testing results which I gathered of using tier 5 versus tier 4, and it's very interesting what we can find out from those battles. Then I'll discuss the pros and cons over tier 5 compared to tier 4, and finally, when you should use tier 5 especially, because there are some situations which can give you 20, 30 gold heads that if you're not utilizing the true potential of tier 5, you may be missing out on. So if you want to know how to get more value for your tier 5, or if they are even worth using, you definitely want to check out the rest of the video. Now let's begin by discussing the base statistics of each troop. Keep in mind here when I discuss them, I am looking at Hanasari units, so the stats will not be exactly the same depending on which civilization you're looking at and which troop, but for the most part, they will be similar increases compared to each troop. To start off with, the tier 4 Hanasari units have 197 base attack, 192 base defense and health, 75 base march speed, 11 base load, and 4 base power per troop. In comparison, the tier 5 have around 30% more attack, leaving them with 227 base attack. They have around 24 more base health, leaving them with 216 base health. The same for attack, another 24 increase to 216. They do have around 5 less base march speed, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 5 less. So they have 5 less base march speed, which means they will be a tad slower. They have 2 extra base load and 6 extra base power, which is really good. So you can see here right off the bat, the tier 5 are statistically way stronger than tier 4, and that is to be expected. They are later in the technology tree and are difficult to unlock, so you would hope they have more stats. The next base statistic is training costs. So tier 4 to train will take 600,000 wood personally for Hanasari units, 450,000 stone, and 40,000 gold. They will take around a day and 5 hours of speed ups and will give you 8,000 power. Tier 5 units will give 1.6 million wood, 1.2 million stone, and 800,000 gold. That is an almost 20 times increase in gold, so do keep that in mind. And it will take around a day and 19 hours to train all these troops. Though the difference in power here is quite amazing. The 8,000 power from tier 4 compared to 20,000 power from tier 5. So you can see right there, the speed up difference in tier 5 definitely gives tier 5 a good advantage there, making it so that training tier 5 is going to be more valuable for speed ups, but going to cost you more resources, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The next thing to note with tier 5 is their healing cost is around 3 times that of a tier 4 unit for the base resources and 20 times that in gold. So for example, to heal 10,000 Hanasari units, it's going to take 3.2 million wood, 2.4 million stone, and 1.6 million gold, compared to tier 4 where it's only going to take 1.2 million wood, 900,000 stone, and 80,000 gold. They are way cheaper for the same amount of units healed. So you would hope that the elite Hanasari units or the tier 5 units would get around a 1 to 3 trade on tier 4. So you would hope that each tier 5 unit is worth around 3 tier 4 units. There is one thing that gives tier 5 another boost here. It is actually crystal technology. If you get higher crystal technology, you're going to notice that the healing cost for tier 5 is going to go down by up to 40% if you get both levels to level 10. And that's going to give them a decent advantage over tier 4 because they get all those base stats with a much lower healing cost. Not lower than tier 4 units, but it is much lower than the initial cost, so do keep that in mind. Their healing cost is not set in stone and can change, especially with Crystal Tech, and also my healing costs are not that of a VIP 16 player, who does have another hospital resource cost reduction of 10%. So keep in mind, tier 5 units can actually have lower healing costs, not than tier 4, but will have lower healing costs than I am showing you, but they are usually going to have around a 1 to 3 healing cost unless you've got that high level crystal technology, which you probably won't get till the end of a KVK. Now that we know the real base statistics of tier 5 though, it's time to take a look at a couple of battle reports. And here we are on the Rise of Kingdoms battle simulator, and here I ran 8 tests, well 7 that actually went through, of tier 5 versus tier 4 units. Every single test was run completely fair. I did use it to emulate a bit more of a whale account because I feel like most players, if you're going to look at this, you want to know if it's going to work really late endgame where you've got that higher VIP and higher equipment. So I found that running it with a much higher and more powerful account is important. So I ran both sides with 210,000 units with the Byzantium civilization. They're all going to be cavs. One side was tier 5, one side was tier 4. I then ran them all with the same buffs from buildings and alliances, holy sites. Each side got 20% health to emulate a 10% health city skin and a 10% health rune. Every single side got a fully talented Hellish Wasteland set, plus a talented horn and a talented ring. I gave each side a 10% defense boost with all the iconics for their equipment, and I set their VIP level at 17 to 18. The talent tree for both sides was a skill tree, and if I didn't mention it before, I am running Houchabang with Joan of Arc for both sides just to see how they compare to each other in a 1v1, rather than doing them against other troops and trying to figure out how it could go there, because that's a bit more RNG based. I found it better to get them to go head to head. Now, let's start off by looking at some of the reports. In the first report here, this is where the trend really started to begin. Tier 5 units won the battle with around 86,000 units remaining, where Tier 4 lost the battle. Tier 5 actually did lose more power though, and took around 14,000 sevs, where Tier 4 took around 30,000 sevs. The next report was pretty much identical on the amount of troops remaining and the amount of sevs dealt, like almost identical to the T. The report after that was a little bit different. The Tier 5 took around 1,000 extra sev wounds and also dealt almost 1,000 less sev wounds, but I think this may have been an outlier. Keep in mind, we are running the skill tree here. This can lead to a bit of RNG, but for the most part, I think you would expect this. For the next report, it kind of reverted back to those beginning reports, where Tier 5 had around 83,000 units remaining, and then the Tier 4 lost by around 30,000 sev wounds and had no troops remaining. The report after that, the Tier 5 did pretty much the same again. They took a few less sev wounds and dealt a few more sev wounds, but it wasn't really that big of a difference. And for the 6th report, it was pretty much a little bit worse than the other reports, but almost the same, within like 600 or 700 sevs. And then the 7th report, once again, was probably the best report, but very, very similar. Every single report here was within 2,000 sev wounds, so really, really accurate result. We can tell that Tier 5 versus Tier 4, if you're not really running different like equipment and stuff, are very, very accurate and going to be consistent. There is no major inconsistency. It's not like Tier 5 are winning by ridiculous margins, but there is one thing to note here. The Tier 5 have been losing on the power, which means you are actually going to take more kill point lost than you are going to be giving to your opponent. And what does that mean? Well, your hospital costs are going to be much, much higher. For example here, if I were to heal 14,087 Tier 5 units, it's going to take a ton of resources. It would take 4.5 million food, 3.38 million stone, and 2.25 million gold to be exact. Whereas if I were to do this for Tier 4 units, it's going to be a bit different. Maybe not necessarily on those base things such as food and stone, but certainly on the gold. So if I were to heal 30,693 Tier 4 units, it's only going to set me back around 3.68 million food, 2.76 million stone, which is actually almost more than the Tier 5, but it's going to set you back 246,000 gold, which is 1/10 of what the Tier 5 units were taking. So you can see right there, gold, which is already way, way, way more difficult to gather and is worth around 3 of each normal resource, is going to be way cheaper for Tier 4 units, which is definitely something to keep in mind when you are using Tier 5 versus Tier 4. So what we can pull away from these battle reports is that Tier 5 are going to be more sustainable on the open field. They're going to last longer. That means they're going to take more swarms. They're going to take more damage. You won't have to refresh as much. But Tier 4 are going to be much cheaper to heal in terms of gold, and if we do the difference in gold, it's almost a 6 million resource difference, since gold is worth around, like I said before, 3 times the resources compared to food, wood, or stone. So keep that in mind. It's going to be a really, really big difference right there. Maybe a 4 million extra resource reduction for Tier 4 compared to Tier 5, because Tier 4 will take a few more base resources, such as food and stone. Now that we've seen the base stats and the battle reports of Tier 5, what are some pros and cons for Tier 5 over Tier 4? And we'll start off with the pros. Like I said before, Tier 5 are going to last way longer in the open field. This doesn't necessarily mean just for fighting players. It also does mean for barb farming. If you're running Tier 4 units and you're doing AoE barb farming, for example, you're going to notice that March is going to die way, way quicker. Not necessarily because the commanders are weaker. I personally noticed when I didn't have Tier 5 tech, it wasn't really the commanders. It was more I didn't have Tier 5 units. And I can say with confidence, both on the battle reports and personal experience, Tier 5 are going to last way longer on the field. Like, there is no question about it, including AoE barb farming, and that's probably the main thing. AoE barb farming with Tier 5 is way better than Tier 4. Also, keep in mind it's going to be really good for events such as, for example, Soroli Crisis or the Lohas Trial event, where you have to keep that one march out and keep it as high HP as possible. Same thing for Cal Karak. Tier 5 are way better. I noticed that when I used to struggle on the Crystal Karak, because, well, I mean, my account is only 1 or 2 marches, it would also be due to the fact I didn't have Tier 5 units. My marches would die so quickly, but since I had one Tier 5 march, it would tank way more, and then the other march with mixed units would do really, really good. So you can see right there, Tier 5 are going to help a lot in PvE PvE content, like a lot. I can say confidently they are probably the biggest shift I've ever had in my account for PvE, literally ever, compared to like when I first unlocked tier 4. It is crazy. The next thing to know is on the open field, like I said, they're going to be way more tanky. You're going up against a guy with tier 4, you will almost certainly win unless your equipment or your crystal tech is way more subpar. So if you've got equal crystal tech, even if it's a little bit weaker and your VIP is a little bit lower, you can still expect to come out of that fight alive. Maybe not necessarily trade good, but you will come out of that fight alive. The next thing to note with tier 5 is they are way better to train for events in terms of power gain. They're going to be way cheaper on speed ups, and often the thing you run out of for events is not resources when you're training, it is those speed ups. So since they are cheaper on speed ups and give you more power per speed up, they are much better for events such as Mightiest Governor, Zenith, Game of Power, any event that's going to require you or really nudge you to train troops. Tier 5 are going to give you a massive advantage over tier 4 players, especially on speed ups. I personally run out of speed ups before resources. It may be different for you, but often you will run out of training speed ups before you do resources, so they are definitely much higher value to train in those regards. The final advantage to tier 5 really over tier 4 is that they can benefit from crystal technology a lot more, specifically these special medicines, which is required for other parts of the crystal technology tree. So it is nice to actually go and get special medicines in some situations where you're going to actually benefit from it rather than it being a almost useless thing. At least it gives you some amount of resources back and some amount of benefit. Plus, anything that's going to give you a % reduction in healing cost for your hospital is going to be way better when you're running tier 5, because what's going to happen is you're going to get a larger % reduced because tier 5 are way more expensive. So for example, this stratagem Make to Splints, which reduces your unit cost by 10%, is much better for tier 5 units because they're going to benefit more because the resource reduction is going to be much greater for them. Now, what are some cons of tier 5 units? Well, first of all, they are expensive to unlock. The last few technologies, while they are extremely powerful, are going to set you back around 75 to 80,000 gems for the Master's Blueprints, and I'm sure you're going to be buying Books of the Covenant. Also, tier 5 units themselves take around 100 days of speed ups for themselves to unlock, plus all the other technologies prerequisite to it is going to take around 1,000 days of speed up. So it's going to take quite a while or quite a lot of money and time to push for these tier 5 units, which means that if you are pushing for tier 5, you're going to have to pause stuff such as VIP and Commanders as you allocate a lot more gems towards getting Master's Blueprints to level up your buildings to level 25, and also toward getting stuff such as Books for the Castle. Keep in mind you can still get value for those gems from stuff such as More Than Gems, but they're never going to be as valuable as if you spend it on VIP or if you spend it on Commanders, because in the end, they're going to be a more long-term investment than tier 5. Keep in mind, though, the tier 5 technology, which I didn't mention before, but as a pro, I guess, tier 5 technology is really potent and really strong. Back onto the cons, though, tier 5, like I said before, are going to be a lot more expensive to heal than tier 4, especially in gold. The most annoying thing with tier 5 is you have to start grinding gold really hard, and compared to someone who uses only tier 4, you can't really trade your gold away for more resources. I often found each KVK, I might have had like 100 million gold, and I traded all for like 300 million wood. It was really good, allowing me to fight a lot longer, and I really enjoyed when I was able to do that. But now that I'm using tier 5 a little bit on the open field, you will notice that I'm not going to be trading my gold. I'm going to be a little bit lower on those resources, and to do that, I either have to gather more efficiently or gather more in general. So keep that in mind, tier 5 do require a little bit more commitment. Also, in the off-season, tier 5 are not going to be as strong for open field or fighting, even though you probably won't be fighting in off-season. If there is a civil war, you're doing 1v1 situations, I highly recommend just sticking with tier 4 units, especially since you won't be benefiting from this healing cost reduction from the KVK tree, plus any other healing cost reductions from KVK you won't be benefiting from, which can mean that tier 5 are going to be much more expensive to heal, especially in the off-season. The next disadvantage is tier 5 are a tad bit slower than tier 4. I do find that important to mention. Often you'll find that if you're not running Cavs or a really fast commander, tier 5 aren't going to be able to catch players who are using tier 4 or a lower tier unit, because those units are just going to get away super quick. So keep that in mind. If you're running tier 5, you have to be a little bit more strategic with your plays, because you can't really chase down players as effectively unless you have builds built around that, or you've got max crystal tech and you're extremely fast. So for the most part, tier 5 are going to be a little bit slower than tier 4. It is a small amount, but it will make actually quite a big difference if you are trying to escape from people. And that means that in most situations, you will notice that tier 4 players will get away from a tier 5 player, and it may be a little bit difficult, especially without the correct accessories and correct commanders, to catch up with those players. The final major con with tier 5, which can also be argued as a pro in some situations, is that if you make a mistake with that tier 5 march, you're going to take really big sevs. So for example, if I accidentally let a tier 5 march go into an enemy murder ball and it gets run into the ground, it's going to take a ridiculous amount of sevs. You can see that tier 4 took around 30,000 sevs. If a tier 5 march gets fully swarmed down to 0, it's once again going to take around 30,000 sevs. That is pretty much the same between each troop type. obviously depending on stat differences, but for the most part, if my tier 5 were to fully lose, because once you get lower in troops, your trades get worse and worse, you're going to notice that the tier 5 are going to take ridiculous steps, and it's going to be really, really expensive to make up for that mistake. Last KVK, I think I got a march swarmed down by accident. I may have lagged. I don't remember exactly how it happened. I think I was just an idiot and got stuck in the murder ball. Full thing got swarmed down. I took like 25,000 sevs, and it was a much more powerful and much more expensive hospital build than tier 4. Like way more expensive. So keep that in mind with tier 5. You have to play a little bit more safely, or you have to play with more intention to keep that march alive rather than letting it run down as much as you would with tier 4. But this can also be seen as a pro in some situations where if you do get your march caught out a little bit, it's not going to die instantly like a tier 4 march would, since it is much less squishy. Now, what situation should you be using tier 5 units? And the first situation is whenever you have complete field dominance and you're really outfielding your opponents, you have more marchers on the field, there are more people there to back you up, less marchers are being swarmed down, it may be a very good time to bring out those tier 5 units to help assert that dominance on your enemies, because it's much harder to take out a tier 5 march, especially when they're not able to fully swarm it down, and if it's supported by other people, it is extremely difficult to properly take out a tier 5 march. This means that if, let's say, you're in this situation right here where you have a lot more field presence, it is a really nice time to bust out those tier 5 units and use them on the open field, because if you get hit a little bit, you're going to be able to easily retreat and then retreat back into this massive murder ball where you would have a much better chance of surviving than if you were running tier 4, and if you get hit a little bit, it might be the end, because you're going to get hit a little bit, you're going to lose a ton of troops, you're going to get debuffs on you, and it's a much quicker death. So if you're running tier 5 units in a situation where you've got more field presence, it is a really good thing for you. Also, city popping is a nice time to run tier 5. I know it's a little bit cringe to be city popping, and it can be very annoying for your opponents or for you. City popping is nice for tier 5 because you can't really face many consequences when you city pop, plus you're going to deal more damage to your opponents in a quicker period of time than if you were to use tier 4, so this is a nice time to use tier 5 units. The next time to use tier 5 is whenever you're swarming a garrison. So if you're swarming a pass, which I don't recommend, but let's say you're swarming a pass, a flag, a fort, anything that's going to get swarmed down to be burnt, is a tier 5 only. If you're not swarming it with tier 5, you are making a mistake, because tier 5 will take much less dead troops than tier 4 will, because tier 4, like we said before, take more sevs. The same thing applies to dead troops. So if you're swarming with tier 5 units, you're going to take less deads. Obviously, you're going to inflict less deads on people who are garrisoning with tier 5, so you can garrison with tier 5, but that's also reliant on who's in the garrison, because if you have tier 4 in the garrison, all the tier 5 go down to the level of the tier 4 units. That's what I personally understood from it. So keep that in mind. If you're swarming a garrison or a flag, really good time to bust out tier 5 troops. It's a really nice time. You're going to take way less deads. You're going to hopefully inflict more deads, and that's when you really want to use tier 5. You want to use them when you're in a situation where you've got full field dominance, and if you're trying to swarm down a flag, a garrison, even a rally, it's a good time to bring out tier 5. So whenever you have field dominance, whenever you're swarming down important things such as flags and rallies, tier 5 are almost an essential thing to have. Now that you know when you should use your tier 5 units, when shouldn't you use them? And the first time is in past garrisons, or just really garrisons in general that have a lot of mixed troops. For example, a garrison that's got a ton of tier 4 and not many tier 5 units, it's not a good time to bring out the tier 5 units. And the reason is because garrisons and rallies get brought down to the lowest troop types tier. So for example, if there's a garrison with 500,000 tier 4 and 1 million tier 5 units, those tier 5 are going to be counted pretty much as tier 4 units. The best way to see how this is if you run a Barbarian Fort rally and you ask someone to join that rally with their tier 5 and you put tier 4 in it, you're going to notice they pretty much take the exact same amount of sevs regardless of having tier 5 units. And this is because, to make it fair and equal, Lilith does count the tier 5 pretty much as tier 4 in terms of statistics, and they aren't counted individually. The one thing to note here though is that tier 5 are still going to be way better in important garrisons and rallies, because in those situations you're going to notice that if the garrison or rally gets low, and that means all the tier 4 are pretty much dead, the tier 5 are going to kick in and they're going to be more tanky and much more difficult to kill, which is way better than the tier 4. So if it's an important garrison or important flag, important rally, then you want to put as many tier 5 as you can, if not only tier 5 in that garrison, to ensure that A, it doesn't burn as quickly, or B, it doesn't burn at all, because that can be the decider of a KVK. So if it's an important flag, important fortress, important pass, or an important holy site, or an important rally target, then put as many tier 5 units as you can in there. But if you are trying to garrison something, for example, that's not going to be as important and it's got a lot of tier 4 in there, I think just stick with tier 4 or don't garrison at all, because otherwise you're going to take extra tier 5 deads, which you don't need. Speaking of extra tier 5, we're going to talk about some ways to get extra tier 5 sevs, and that is running it inside of a ball that doesn't have field presence. For example, let's say right now I was on the enemy team up here, and there is currently no enemy team. They all left. And I rock up with a full march of T5. I'm going to get annihilated by all these people here, and it's not going to really accomplish much. And that's an exaggerated version. But if you're running T5 in a situation where you don't have field control, a lot of people say you should. I say you shouldn't, because if you get those T5 swarm down, you've got one big hospital bill to deal with, and then not much has changed. Let's say you ran 3 marches of T5, you got fully swarmed down because you have no field presence, everyone else is swarmed down as well. Well, what did you accomplish? Well, you just got a really big hospital bill. You're much less useful to your kingdom because you have to heal those troops, you have to spend your resources, and then you're going to run out of resources quicker, and you still don't have the field presence. So just run those T4 units in those situations, wait for people to get online, wait for a murder board to start forming for you to actually make a push before you switch to T5, where they're going to be A, more beneficial to your account, and B, way more beneficial to your kingdom because they're really going to accomplish something. So try to only run T5 when you have a really, really large amount of field presence. So now after all this, what is my final statement on tier 5 units versus tier 4 units? And I think that I'm going to have to say there is no definitive winner. I like using tier 4 for specific times on the open field when I'm low on resources and we aren't controlling the field for garrisoning. But I also love using my tier 5 in specific situations, especially related to PvE content, when they can be probably the best thing in the whole entire game to be ever made. So there is no one definitive best answer. I can't say that T5 are better than T4. I can't say that T4 are better than T5 in any situation because we've seen in reports T4 technically trade better but also technically trade worse, and it is very, very complicated to the point where you can't say that one troop is better than another. The only thing I can say is that either troop has different usages. One troop's going to perform better in this situation, one troop's going to perform better in another situation, and I think that's the best way to put it. T5, high risk, high reward. T4, lower risk, lower reward. That's probably the easiest and most simple way to categorize T5 and T4. Now, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. I tried to make it as informative as possible. I put together as much information as I possibly could on T5 and T4 units, and if you did enjoy it, or you share a different opinion, or you just agree with my opinion, consider letting me know in the comments down below. I find it very interesting to hear what you guys have to say about my videos, and also to hear your opinions, because your opinions do matter to me, and your questions are also extremely important. So if you have any questions, ask them in the comments. Any video ideas, anything you want to tell me about this video, if you think I'm completely wrong, let me know down below. Now, I just want to say thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.